started in 1952, and I graduated in June of '55 with a BA degree in radio television. And then I had been told about a possible position in Sioux Falls, which is, of course, the largest city still in South Dakota. With Jim Slack's recommendation, I interviewed for a job at KELO Radio and TV in Sioux Falls, and went there for an interview, was accepted, and moved to the city of Sioux Falls, an apartment downtown, not too far away from the studios, and was able to walk to work at KELO Radio AM, and also for TV, where I'd be working in the engineering. On AM, I'd be the afternoon person for both Saturday and Sunday, and into the evening. The TV engineering across the street in a refurbished theater, as many TV stations got their start that way in theaters. It was a 3-camera setup, although I never operated the camera. They had their people already established in that area. So in the film production room, we set up the programs that were sent to us by various networks or companies to be shown. Although the radio station was, I believe, ABC, KELO TV was a conglomeration because it was the first and only TV station in 4 states. And it had a big area. They also, over time, had put up translator towers with a studio with each one. And an individual would put the tower on at a certain time and take it off at night. When master station down in Sioux Falls went dark and turned on the next morning, so then these translator stations would come on. So they were located at Chamberlain and up at Pier on the Missouri River, and at near Watertown, which covered the whole Northeast, Aberdeen and some other cities into North Dakota. So I helped splice film and then set the reels up on the projectors, where they were turned on from the board, a large, about 10-foot long board with various dials and wheels, what have you, and some audio control. I recall that the Lawrence Welk Show was one of the programs that we were contracted, and that's when they had had sponsors. You recall Geritol was one of their sponsors. That was a reel of film about yay big, about 18 inches wide, and it was kind of heavy too. We also, it seems to me, took off the air some of the programs like, not Ma Perkins, that was radio, but Guiding Light was one of those oldies, and there's been several others that have lasted 30 or 40 years. So one of the activities that I had and proceeded to do soon after moving there was to join the United Methodist Church in downtown Sioux Falls, a huge membership and structure taking up over almost a block anyway. They had a young adult fellowship, which I found interesting, and that's where I met my first wife, Dorothy, who had graduated from the university at Fargo, North Dakota, in Phi Ed, as I recall, and her first job in Sioux Falls was in the YWCA, which was in the same structures as the YMCA in effect. except for the apartments, which or rooms they had for young men. So she was also very interested in what we call interpretive dance. So I did some things with scripting of programs which she and several other ladies of the adult fellowship participated in. That was another thing we had in common. And we liked to eat, and she was a very nice dancer too, just a regular pop music, of the 50s. It was a nice fellowship that, let's see, I think it was about maybe 8 months or so later, we got married. And her folks and my folks both came down from their respective communities for the wedding, since all of our new friends in our fellowship was there in Sioux Falls. So we found an apartment and moved our joint possessions into that, and it was convenient walking from her work at the Y as well. Let's see, I think it was about 2 years later, I was asked if I would like to move to this big metropolis of Chamberlain. You recall that's where one of the translator towers is. I said, well, if I can go home and talk to my wife about this. And he said, okay. So I asked Dorothy what she thought about moving out to this little community of probably not much more than 1,000. And she said, what's our alternative? See, there would be no job for her there either. Being a small community, nothing for her to do. I said, I'll check it out. So I went to the telecasting broadcasting magazine for the industry.
Okay.
I had my pad and pencil and copied down in the want ad section, wanted an announcer engineer, WSMI, Litchfield, Illinois. Okay, I'll take this back to Dorothy and ask her what she thinks. She said, that sounds great. And I made a phone call and talked to Hayward Talley, who's deceased about maybe 5 years ago. And he was the one who originated the station, so he had high technical skills, very sharp guy, management skills, and he had a couple of salesmen, and to cover the Litchfield territory to the west and the Hillsborough, the county seat territory, to the east. And so our call letters were WS Southern, M Mid, Illinois, I, SMI. A lot of people don't realize that people can pick their call letters with the FCC. We had a good conversation on the phone, and he said that he would pick out an apartment for us in Hillsborough. I gave my notice that I would be leaving, and KELO, and we picked up our belongings and put them in a U-Haul trailer and took off for Illinois and said goodbye to our folks by phone. And we would make several trips back and forth, they to the Illinois and we to North and South Dakota for the next few years while we were in Illinois. It was not long after we moved into the apartment, she became pregnant. Little did we know that the landlord did not want children and had not relayed that on to Hayward Talley. And so we proceeded then to begin looking for another means of living location, and decided a mobile home. And we bought a Richardson about 45 feet long, and the narrow ones 8 feet wide. They're more 10 and 12 and 15, what have you, expandables now. But it did for us, and we were happy, and we were able to find a good spot to move it to on the edge of Hillsboro, southern edge of Hillsboro, on a hill, overlooking the community and a wide area. The landowner said we could have it rent-free if we put in the utilities. In other words, piped in the water, put in a septic tank, and saw to it that there was the electricity. So we did those three things, and we were utility-free for as long as we wanted to have our home there. I was able to have a small garden, of course, in the back, and about a half a block to a quarter of a block to mow. Norman was born in the latter part of 57, 58, and within 9 months, well, within a few months actually, she was pregnant again with our second child, Scott, Terry Scott. So the boys were born while we were at Hillsboro, and we had nice neighbors. And the boys did very well growing up there. And I had been talking with Dorothy previously, even in Sioux Falls, about the possibilities of the ministry someday. She was agreeable to it. She came from a well-grounded Christian family and had some good experiences in the Christian faith. It wasn't long before I got into conversation with George Mayo, the pastor of the United Methodist Church there. We had changed our membership from Sioux Falls to Illinois, to Hillsboro, and joined the church there, and both had been working with the young people's group of junior high and high school, and I sang in the choir and what have you. And so he was very encouraging, and I asked him about the process, and he said, well, we'd have to talk with the district superintendent. Now, in Illinois, there are about five districts. So I talked with the district superintendent, and he told me about the seminary up in Naperville, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, maybe about 20, 30 miles west. But that first, if I would like to be sure about seminary, I could have an assignment of some churches not too far away from Hillsboro. In other words, he knew about these 3 small congregations that were in the next county west of Hillsboro. And so I said, okay, I'd be glad to take in that assignment. So he gave me the contact names of the lay leaders at each one, and we worked on the time schedule, and one of them would alternate with one of the other churches, which was very small, and I would have 2 services every Sunday morning. A couple of things which I did at the radio station WSMI, I should mention, was one, I had a Monday through Friday radio program called Party Line. Hayward had been doing it himself in the absence of someone that he was going to wait for somebody to take it over. After about a week, he turned Party Line over to me, and I had it was a 25-minute show. He did 5 minutes of news and then into the show, called in, and it was very fun. One thing I needed to do was to pick a question of the day to ask each caller. And then the callers may have their own questions or problems, the concerns that they want to talk about, like how long should I cook asparagus? you know. So I said, okay. So I continued with the process of asking the question of the day. About maybe a month into the show, the cost of postage had just gone up. And so I asked the question, and I told the first caller what the question was. Since the price of postage has gone up, do you have any thoughts on that, pro or con? Seems simple enough, safe enough. I couldn't get into politics or religion or some other no-nos, So I got some calls on that, and they kept coming in, and people made their comments. About 25 after, a call came in from a rather irate gentleman who said, "How dare you question the operation of the United States government and its postal service?" He made that comment, and then he hung up. And assuming that he was still listening to the radio in his post office somewhere in a 4 or 5 county listening range of WSMI, I said, well, it seems that we all have the freedom of speech and of thought, and this gentleman does too, and each of us, being taxpayers, paying his salary and the postal service in part, should have the opportunity, it seems, to express our freedom of thought. And I said, thanks for listening, everyone. Tune in again tomorrow. This is Jerry Ray signing off for Party Line. Not long after I was doing Party Line, somebody suggested a newsletter that people might like to get some information, about what's happening, what comes in on Party Line, about the station, and what's happening with Mr. and Mrs. Jerry Ray. Because that's how we were known. Of course, people in Hillsboro knew who we were. Yeah. And nobody ever said anything. They realized that was much easier to remember maybe than Barnhart. Another interesting program that developed without my knowing about it or anything is that one of the salesmen, the one for the Hillsboro area, had made contact with the White House Cafe, which was off the highway a couple of miles on a good road in some beautiful territory, and had excellent food, had a great reputation, had been around for a long time. And apparently they had been listening to me and made a request that I do a table hop type show at the White House. And so the salesman and Mr. Talley had been checking it out, and of course had to check the finances and all, what would be the income, and I would do maybe 1 or 2 commercials, and they wanted an hour from 1 to 2 o'clock, which was reasonable because I was still coming back from my Sunday service in the next county, remember, with Dorothy. So that worked out very well. And so we carried the little box, which was a connector for the mic cord, which would be, I think it was something like 60, 70 feet long, could get to the 2 rooms of the White House, would connect into the telephone systems. This was something that Dorothy would operate the volume on the control box. She was there to check that out, and I would walk around and table hop with the mic, and people loved it. They just loved, being interviewed. How you doing today, and where are you folks from? "Oh, you drove all the way over from Hillsboro or wherever the next town was."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
That went on for as long as I continued to be with WSMI. And I brought in a little bit of extra income, as I say, on the side, which we needed. Everybody had two jobs in the rural areas. They farmed a few acres and they had something in the next town, whether it was, working for the grocery store or whatever, but everybody worked. And they had fair-sized families. Well, the Ballinger's families stakeout home was not too far off the road going into the first of the two churches, which I would have on a regular basis. It had been served at one time out of Carlinville, the next town west, about maybe 5 miles over. Yeah, so the Ballinger family said that they would be willing to babysit when they stayed with them, and then we'd pick them up on the way back. So I served the church out of the three churches out of Carlinville for about a year, and then we had our minds made up that yes, it would be okay to give seminary a try. We figured that we could sell the mobile home back to the company from which we bought it and resold it back to them for a little bit less than the $4,000 that we paid for it originally, and we had paid it off. Yeah. We were lined up for seminary. It would be 3 years, and I had met with Dean Clymer, and he was the dean of the seminary too. Dean was the dean, Clymer, and Clymer of the seminary at Naperville. And there was a small college campus associated with it as well that had been part of the evangelical church. The DS found a student assignment for me at Braceville, about 50 miles south of Chicago, and there was a parsonage connected with it. So we moved our belongings, what have you, up to Braceville. And Braceville at one time had been a huge mining town of over, I was told, about 4,000, just huge. So Braceville got to start with that, bracing up the sides to get out the coal. And of course, there were plenty of factories in the area that needed it, as well as everybody burnt coal. Got along wonderfully with the people at Braceville. They were just very, very accommodating, but Dorothy felt very lonely. There was not a lot of fellowship for her. And she with two little babies. So I started seminary and went up there for the whole week and stayed in a small apartment of a retired professor and his wife within half a block of the main seminary building. After the first year, Dorothy said she wanted to move up to Naperville and get a job and get an apartment for the family. So that happened, and she got a teaching position. She got in contact with the Board of Education of a community not too far out from Naperville. I think about maybe 15, 20 miles, not too far. Was able to get a ride with another teacher coming from Naperville, and so I went to classes in the morning, and she got a babysitter for the boys, and then came home at noon and did some of my studying and took care of the boys and got them down for a nap, and we worked it out and finished off the seminary experience in in time. I got my degree, a Bachelor of Divinity, so that was my second bachelor's degree. And I learned from the district superintendent back in South Dakota, with whom I'd been in touch, told him what was happening and I planned to come back. So he had a position ready for me. He told me, however, that I had to meet one other requirement for ordination. Since my senior year was not under the supervision of a resident pastor or one in the area, I needed another year at Doland before I could be ordained. And that happened at Pierre while I continued at Doland. So Doland was a town, I suppose, of maybe around 2,000. It had 3 churches. I was the only resident pastor. The others, 2 pastors, a Lutheran and a Roman Catholic, came in to administer to their particular churches from other communities. The national denomination has a department called Television Radio Film Commission, TRAFCO. TRAFCO put out a variety of short and long programs in different types. And one of them I heard about through a magazine or newspaper is called The Word and Music of the Christian Faith. And I thought to myself, I wonder what it costs. So I made contact and I found out that the cost for the albums to go along with the program would be just under $100, and that the scripts were free for a weekly program. So I got a copy of it from TRAFCO down at Nashville. I called up the South Dakota Council of Churches, and that was at Huron, about, maybe 40 miles away. And I asked the director if he knew about TRAFCO, and he said yes. He said, well, I have information that they have a program called Word and Music. The program would cost this amount. I'm going to make a contact with a radio station at Redfield, which is about 35 miles to the west of Doland, and find out if that radio station would like to put this on as for public service time, because every station is required to have a certain amount of public service. And he said, well, okay. And I said, now, do you think the council would be willing to foot the bill for these albums of music that are required? And I would give appropriate information about the council or plugs several times during the show. He says, sounds good to me. I'll check it out with them. I got there okay. And then I went to the station and I told them what I had. And I showed them the sample of scripts. And it was kind of a social ministry script. It was not heavy theology or anything. He said, that sounds good. I said, okay, can we put it on Sunday morning? He said, sure. And I said, well, now, can I come over on a day before that Sunday and record the program here? They had an extra studio, extra board, turntables. So I was able to put that on tape, which is all that was used at that time, an hour reel. And so that went on. Well, I'm a guy, I think you know me well enough that I can't leave one alone without taking another step. And I did. And I called up Dale Hunt up at KABR, and I asked him if he'd be willing to take a public service radio program called Word and Music. I said, there's no charge. I'd send you the reel every week, and you can put it on and mail it back to me. I said, that's the only charge, just to mail it back to me. And Dell said, sure. So I had one. Then I went for Watertown. Watertown, KWAT. I called them up, and pretty soon Watertown was on the network. I said, here's the only requirement, that you return the tape to me, please, so that I can send the next week's program to you. And so they all accepted that. So we had those three. Then I went to Brookings and got that one, and eventually added Vermilion's new radio station, commercial station on Main Street. Later on, a year or so later, when I was moved to a church down near Yankton, I knew I wouldn't be able to get to Redfield to tape anymore. I went over to Yankton's WNAX, the big 50,000 watter. He said, well, and he said, I'll tell you, Jerry, it looks like a fantastic program, and I'm glad for the fact you've got a good network going here, but I don't want to take any religious programs without commercial status. So he didn't, but he said, I'll let you use our studio. So he let me have an extra studio there. And so I had that going when I moved to my new assignment down in that area. From Doland, there were two churches north of Vermilion and Yankton, and I can't recall the name of them, but they did have a parsonage for me there, and there was a school in the area for the boys. But I was there. I was coming up to a year. And they said, oh, we're going to be moving you now. The Presbyterian pastor was there for a year. He was here only a year. So you can only stay here a year or two. So they let me go. But I did make a contact over to Minnesota. So I called him and I said, do you have a possibility of any openings that are coming up? He said, we're going to be realigning some of these churches. So we can open the one at Waite Park next to St. Cloud. Just before Thanksgiving, the family and I loaded up our belongings from our church there in South Dakota and drove up to Waite Park, just to the west of St. Cloud. And along with that were two other churches out to the west. Lake Coronis had a little United Methodist Church, very active, lots of young couples, a little community of about maybe 200 or 300. And then another one over to the northeast. I can't think of it right now. In '73, both of my boys had graduated from high school, and I got the feeling that it was time for another change of position. And so I made inquiry and learned that there was an opening down at Elmore on the Minnesota-Iowa border. After, I believe it was 2 years, and I had some good experiences there, and I had helped the high school there with its drama department. They were in need of somebody to direct the junior senior class play one year, and had a nice experience doing that, and a little extra cash on the side. My wife, Dorothy, decided that we'd had enough of the moves and that she wanted out. And I said, oh, I'm sad, I'm sorry, but if that's what you need to do. I let her get her lawyer, and they drew it up, and I signed the papers for that experience. I should mention that Dorothy did write a short letter to the board of the church at Elmore and let them know that she would be divorcing me, and that in no way did she feel it should deter from my ministry. And the board didn't take that too well and called in an appropriate person in as a supervisor and told him that they did not want a divorced person living in the parsonage, and so I would have to move. This is what happened. And caused me to say, okay, Dorothy has found a room outside of Mankato somewhere, an apartment, for our third child, Weston, who is still at home with her, and Norman and Scott were off at the university at Winona. Norm had left first. He had, I believe, a year that he stayed with his major, which was radio television. But he decided he was spending too much time with that, and he decided to go on the road for his first love, which was magic, which he'd been doing since he was about 12 years old. And so he went on the road with doing his magic show full time. Scott had gone to Winona for its nursing department, and he completed his 4-year degree and met his future wife, a farm gal who was also interested and got her major in nursing. They have continued to be in nursing. Scott just retired from the one of the large hospitals in La Crosse, and Sharon continues to be a nurse practitioner, and the next step up at a Mayo hospital, and goes on trips to Hawaii and other places for further instruction in their profession. I'm happy for them. Going back, I decided, okay, I'm going to go live in Mankato. I found a small place, and it wasn't too far away from one of the healthcare centers called Hillcrest on the edge of Mankato. I sought out the administrator, and Mrs. Helen Johnson was the vice president of the Throw Corporation, I learned, and she was the one I would be seeing. And I explained to her that I was free from ministry, although I still had connection with the United Methodist Church based out of Minneapolis. And she said, well, we've been looking for a chaplain for some time. Would you like to help me develop the position? And I said, oh, that'd be wonderful. And so, and they also had Throw Company also had 2 other nursing homes. Oak Lawn, up near the upper campus of Mankato, I've forgotten the name of the third one, was not too far away from Oak Lawn. So I began my work there, and it would last, little did I realize, 10 beautiful years. Just fantastic. And I was in charge of the program, which meant being in contact with the clergy who were already coming to do once a week a worship service. I did have difficulty with one pastor. I don't know, I'd been there, 5 or 6 years, when this pastor said, I understand. He came to me, he said, I understand you've been visiting one of my parishioners. I said, well, she was brand new, and I go to meet all new parishioners that come to our facility. And he said, well, I don't want you to visit her anymore. I will take care of her needs. But otherwise, I never had any other pastors tell me that I was off limits. So I kept card files on all the parishioners in a special place at each one of the 3 facilities. Besides having 3 short chapel services at Hillcrest, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Then I would be at Oak Lawn on Thursdays, and Tuesday at this other home I can't think of. So I'd have 5 worship services I'd be giving a week every morning at one of those 3 places. And I had begun several different types of discussion group programs, and some of them would be personal, about I remember when, about their homes and things. So they were not religious. But then I do another program of Bible study, and I would maybe have sometimes maybe 6 or 8 people, which wasn't too bad at any one of the 3 homes. So those were 3 of the programs that I did, besides visiting new people who would enter our home. Sometimes I was even asked to do a funeral for one. And Hillcrest, there was a lady who had been there for a while, in maybe her late 60s or so, and a gentleman who was a little bit older in another section who seemed to be spending a lot of time together. I thought, oh, that's wonderful to have a sharing of experiences and what have you, and their families both lived in the area and seemed to know about it and be in touch. And eventually they asked me if I would marry them. We had a lovely little garden space in this H section at Hillcrest. We used that for a chapel area for the wedding. And then I went to the hospitals, including Mayo Clinic. I drove over to Mayo several times. I met my second wife, June, I believe in 1987, in adult fellowship group at the Centenary United Methodist Church in downtown Mankato. The group planned to meet at her home in North Mankato for their next meeting in August, and they would be deciding what to do for September's meeting, at that meeting. And I thought, I suggested that maybe they would like to try going to the Renaissance Festival, which wasn't too far away at Shakopee, and people seemed to agree with it. So there were probably about 15 or 20 of us. But Saturday morning, when we were supposed to meet at 9 o'clock or 9:30, I was the only one there at June's home in North Mankato. And it got to be close to 10, and nobody else showed up. And I figured, well, do you want to go, June, to the Renaissance Festival? She said, I'm game. So off we went, and that was our first, quote, date, as it turned out to be. And we just had a fabulous day together. She let me drive her car, which was a real trust ring. She had as her profession, well, there are several professions. She had been office manager. She had been an insurance rep with several Mexican people helping her down in Texas when she and her second husband went down there for his health. They lived in Austin. Then he died not long after. I think they were there 2 or 3 years, and she decided rather than move down to her home territory further close to the Iowa border, she would move to Mankato. And she got a job, having been also tried to be a beautician just out of high school, but could not, because although she'd gone to beautician school, they didn't wear gloves for the chemicals that are needed for caring for hair. And the chemicals really wreaked havoc with her hands. So she dropped out of that, but she still knew a lot about contacts with beauty shops. She made a contact and became their representative for a company out of Minneapolis, and was a representative for several years when I met her. We got married within about, we met in September at that. We continued seeing each other. I lived in North Mankato also. We got married in just after Easter, I think it was in April. So I proceeded to move into her home since it was much nicer than my apartment. I tried for a little garden space in her backyard too. I had to have a garden. In the meantime, discontinued my association with Throw Company after those 10 years. This is off the record. One of the administrators, the Hillcrest administrator, was asked to take Helen Johnson's place when she retired. And she says, I'll only take his place if Jerry isn't chaplain anymore. Well, she had been administrator at Mankato House. That was the second home.
Oh.
Several times we had Christmas parties, and she would get pretty kind of stewed, close to it. And maybe she's a little bit self-conscious on that, but she didn't like the fact that one time on a Tuesday I was there to do my ministry, and for some reason one of their residents' families had scheduled a funeral with their Roman Catholic pastor there at Mankato House. This administrator was the administrator of Mankato House for quite some time and was present when the pastor came, found out that I was there, and he asked me to help in the funeral service. And I could tell on the look on her face, she was not happy at all that I was going to be taking place in a service of a funeral for one of her residents with a Roman Catholic priest.
I mean, she was anti-Catholic?
No.
Or didn't want you cooperating with the
Didn't
Catholic?
want me cooperating. She was Roman Catholic. I'm going to cut out a move that we made to an apartment. Well, we bought a space in a brand new, almost like a condominium. But we were only there a couple of years when other residents started making improvements, and we had to help pay for those improvements as residents and co-owners of an apartment. We didn't like that, and we decided to move to an apartment which was nearby, which was real nice, the first floor, and owned by a doctor and all that. There were several others, indoor parking for our automobile. I should mention about 1987, I had the first of 2 quadruple heart bypasses, and that was done through the VA system. June helped see me through that. It worked out well, and I got back to work within 2 weeks. Then, not too long after that, my mother, who had been a resident for 14 years by herself in a healthcare center, also died in her sleep while we were visiting. June and I were visiting her this one summer, and we got a call while we were visiting high school friends in town that mother had died, and as a result of that, trying to do all the preparation work, I developed a diabetic reaction, and all the way home I was drinking water. So that had to be taken care of. At Mayo Clinic, I happened to be visiting a resident over there when all of a sudden I said, while I'm here, would you mind if we took a test? I just got back from seeing my mother and taking care of her funeral in Aberdeen, and would you take a diabetic test for me? And they did at Mayo, in Rochester, and then he found I had a reading of over 185 or 90, something like that. So they said, best you start getting on insulin right away. And they gave me a little insulin shot there, and I drove the hour back to Mankato overnight. Then it was 10 years later that I had the second bypass operation. We just happened to be driving by Mayo Clinic when we had moved to Rochester by that time. And I said, June, my chest doesn't feel right. The VA is over here on 52. I think I'll just drive right over there. It's just a couple of blocks. And they gave me a wheelchair right away and ordered an ambulance to come after me. And so I had the second bypass there at Mayo. Got home, and June, she was thinking we don't need this big a house anymore, or it was a tri-level home. So we had the first level went down to the basement, and the second level went up to the living room. So there were 3 levels from the garage up and down. And so she was thinking of me when it came time to looking for a new place. So thought maybe it's time to think about retirement and moving over to Rochester, where we'll be a little bit closer to Scott at La Crosse, and we can still see Norman and his family living south of Chisago City on a lake. I see them once in a while. So that was the long and short of it. Getting out of Mankato is kind of a health problem. Making things a little bit easier for me. Mm-hmm. She was being very, very sensitive and very practical. So we bought a home, 3706 15th Avenue Northwest. Yeah, remember that? It's been 4 years that I've been here. I've been away from that location. But we lived there approximately 25, maybe more years. Just perfect for keeping us out of mischief, and not too large either. Yeah. I got some part-time jobs. One of them was Santa Claus, and I have some shots being with Walmart for 5 years as a people greeter, and as a Santa Claus for I think 2 seasons. And then I also had been a Santa Claus over in Mankato for one of the malls. I continued with the Santa Claus in Rochester at the mall. I think it was about 3 years I did that. And not too long after being there, I found out that Norman was doing a magic show on TV with a children's show, and there was public service on Channel 10 in the studios at Rochester Junior College. Guy Hammernick was the director, still is, as far as I know, as well as being a teacher. I asked him about a veterans program, if that would be something that I could work to have on a monthly basis for, say, a half an hour, and he said, that sounds good. Let's do a sample program. And in the meantime, I also found the county veteran service officer, and was willing to be a co-host with me. And so he gave a point of information for veterans, and I did a lot of interviews of persons who came both to the studios, and I went to some meetings where there was a special speaker and recorded people, so I had lots of information. The service officer was willing to go halvesies with me on a recorder, which at that time, 1985 or so, they were rather bulky, about yay big, and weighed who knows how many pounds. And also did a lot of interviewing of people at conventions, the convention speakers for both the American Legion and the VFW. Let's do a look back. In Mankato, I joined the American Legion because one of the residents' sons was going to be the new commander of the American Legion Post 11. So he was looking for a chaplain, so he thought of his mother's relationship with me, and that I told her that I was a veteran, I guess at some time in this experience of visitation. And so he asked me if I would like to be his chaplain, and that continued for some 36 years, from what was it, about 4 or 5 more years there at Mankato. I became chaplain for the other years at Post 92 at Rochester. The commanders that followed said, "Well, you're doing a good job. Why quit now?" So year after year after year after year. So I was doing that in addition to vets visits on TV, which eventually I did for 15 years. I had other experiences in Rochester, became active with the DAV, Disabled American Veterans, with the Veterans of Foreign Wars, VFW, but I didn't take any offices with them because I continued as American Legion chaplain. But I continued going to these other meetings. Also, I helped form the Korean War Veterans Association. We had been meeting in a restaurant on the edge of town, and that's where it kind of got formulated, about 10 of us. And then they moved to another location in downtown Rochester. But I continued my life membership with them, as I did with the other organizations. The association with Vets Visits, it was a wonderful opportunity to get the word out. And we realized we had a good thing going when there were other cable operations in Minnesota that I discovered wanted the show. Eventually it built up to 315 or so. They played the show on an ongoing basis monthly. We were able to do that only because there were American Legion groups, VFW, and others that sent us donations because we had become a 501c3, and for those who do not know, that is a nonprofit organization. And I did that within, I think it was the first 6 months of operation, when I realized I need some help to guide this thing along as it grows. I had gone to a concert at the First Presbyterian Church in Rochester, and it was such a beautiful experience, and it's fantastic, and I thought, this needs to be on cable. So anyway, I asked the director of music if he minded if we used the name of the program series, as well as recording the program of the concert for cable television. And he said, no problem. So it was Festival of Music. That was the name of the series. And it wasn't till about 2 years later, and he called me, he said, "Jerry, it appears that that you need to change the name of the series, because there are members of our board of directors that are concerned." And so we changed it to World Music Festival. And then, of course, it's continued up here on your cable operation. Archie has been good news for me. Only good news. And we need to introduce him to the people, if we may. Is that you there, Jerry? It's me. Yep. I'd like you to meet my friend Archie Cobb II. Is that me? That's you. Well, Archie, I'm so glad you could visit with us today. I am too. Yes, you're looking fine and dandy. I wish I could say the same for you. Oh, come on now. You just watch your tongue. I can't. You can't? Why not? My nose is in the way. Of course it is, of course. All right. Now, when did we meet? Well, it was in the Army in 1948 when you were in basic training, wasn't it? Yeah, that's when I had enough money to adopt you. Yeah, that's what you did. Yes, that's what I did, and we had a good experience together, didn't we, Archie? We sure did. Yeah, and we've been around the world together. We've been to Japan and Korea. Yeah, there were some good times, weren't there, Jerry? There were some excellent times, and then we came when we got back to the University of South Dakota. You were in some shows there. Yes, I was. The Eaglin Follies, as I recall. Oh boy, and were they follies? Oh, some of those girls. Okay, you keep your eye off those girls. Do I have to? Yeah. Okay. Mischievous little guy, isn't he?
Yes.
Oh gosh. Well, Archie, I'm glad to have you living with me in my retirement apartment. I'm glad to be there too. Yes. And should we leave the folks with a final song? Yeah. How about Thanks for the Memories? Well, that's a good one. Yeah. That's Bob Hope's theme song. Yep, that's right. Well, I know that you know some other songs besides that. Yeah. What was that one? Zippity Doo Dah? Oh, yeah. Shall we do that for the folks? All right. Go ahead. Zippity Doo Dah, zippity. Oh my, what a wonderful day. Plenty of sunshine heading my way. Zippity Doo Dah, zippity yay. Mr. Bluebird on my shoulder. It's a truth, it's actual. Everything is satisfactual. Zippity doo dah, zippity yee. Wonderful feeling, wonderful day. Thank you. Bye-bye. Now, when I became active in the American Legion in Mankato, I was very happy to note that they had a very active auxiliary for the ladies as well. So I asked June if she would like to attend the meetings of the auxiliary while I was attending the meetings of the post. And she said very much so. Her first husband had been a prisoner of war over in World War II in the Battle of the Bulge and in that area. He was a prisoner for 2 years. So there's a combination of patriotism and memory's sake and connection with me and what have you. She, I think, was in about her 3rd year in the auxiliary, and all the activities, including being in parades, and of course this is the hat which they wore in the parades, for the women anyway. About the 3rd year, she was asked to become president. And then, along with her job as president, she got this plaque. So I think we have seen this already, haven't we? And that was in the years 1992 and 93. I also should mention that when we transferred over to the American Legion in Rochester, I was asked to become the department American Legion chaplain. I had the support of the Post 11 officers who came over to Rochester, which was quite an honor for me to introduce them to our Post 11 members. And so these Mankato officers came over and highly recommended me for chaplain to the post 92 people who were going to vote me into office on their recommendation. In connection with the 15 years of Vets Visits on TV, June was very patient with me. She was diagnosed with dementia, the Alzheimer's form of dementia, about 2001. Of course, when she was told, she was very, very disgusted and mad, but she didn't know what it was all about. But she was very, very easy to work with for 7 years in our home there in Rochester. She did what she could around the house for the early years. Eventually, it was just spending time in her recliner and listening to music, which is a fine relaxer for the mind. I would have meetings on certain nights, of course, for these different veterans organizations or what have you. And she'd say, "Jerry, do you have to go?" I recall that. And I said, "June, here is a note of when I'm leaving and when I will be back. I promise you. And you have some wonderful music to listen to and relax." And in September, the first week of September, she was in her recliner and moving to her wheelchair, and she had done these things all by herself in the past. I never had to help her. But for the first time, she lost control of her legs and started to crumble to the floor. And luckily, I was on the Davenport right next to her. And I moved over quickly and said, so just calmly reminded her I'm here, and we'll just kind of sit on the floor, just as easy as you can. And then I called for help. And I had already made a inquiry, reservation, if you wish, with a company that had about, probably 8 or 10 cottages and specialized in Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia in different stages. I had a neighbor who helped me get June from the wheelchair into the car, and I drove her over with some of her things that I'd already prepared, a bag in preparation because I knew it was coming. She was just very calm and cool, collected, like everything is fine. And we got to the cottages and went to this. I was told which one she would be at, and they were all fenced in. Some of them had gardens nearby or patios. There was a young man who was waiting and came with the wheelchair, and he got her into the wheelchair, and I parked the car and came in and sat with her at her bed. And then that was the first or second week of September. But there was like about 4 or 5 of people, employees and myself, who would be sitting at a table, who would be feeding people. It got to the point, as they say, where she could not feed herself. Eventually, she spent more time not coming to the table, but just being by herself somewhere. And of course, she didn't really talk to anyone, but she recognized me, but I don't think she ever knew my name at the end, the last couple of weeks. Norman was there to see her several times, and she might be sitting at a table just talking with me, or holding hands, or I'd be reading to her, and he would come into the room and she would smile. somehow he really came through. But he was there probably about 5 or 6 times that I can recall. He drove down from Chisago City. And in the last week of the month, on a Sunday, I think it was the last, during the evenings, Sunday night, she, I think it was about the 28th of the month, she had died in her sleep, and the next morning they called me. June, with all the years of our love together, we had many great times and many sad times. But I thank you, and I thank our Lord above for the patience and the care we've had for each other. Thank you, June Swanson Barnhart.
You were very fortunate to run into her.
Was.
And,
Yep. We were the only two on that trip. So this is Jerry Ray Barnhart, Point Pleasant Heights is my residence, and we are in the patio. My friends, it's so pleasant to have been with you for these times of discussion and memory about my life of 90 years and 7 months. And I'm happy that I could share this experience with you. And hopefully it'll give you some ideas for your future and where you can be and how you will appreciate the people you have now and those in your future. So the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you, be gracious unto you. Amen and peace.